Good evening, welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndall Curtis. The dream of a very fast train down Australia's eastern seaboard has now been embodied in a detailed report, complete with maps and plans and a price tag over $100 billion. But it's not like we haven't been here before. Governments over decades have looked at the dream. Not a single piece of track has been laid. So will it be different this time? Joining me this evening is Labor MP Kelvin Thomson and Liberal MP Steve Chobo. Welcome to you both.
Good evening, Steve. Good evening, Lyndall.
There are other things to talk about, but we'll start with the release of the Government Commission study into high-speed rail.
The most sensitive issue of all with the report is, of course, cost. And there's no doubt there is substantial cost. But the long-term transformational potential of high-speed rail is both real and exciting. The critical judgment call then is between the high upfront financial cost versus the long-term economic benefit, which is why we believe this public debate must be advanced.
What we ought to be doing now is starting to do environmental impact assessment on the preferred route, starting to look at putting money in place to buy and acquire the land that's required. And also we need in the federal department now an implementation unit, not just a small unit that we've had to actually look at these feasibility studies, but let's get on with it.
You make promises you can keep. Don't make promises and create expectations that you cannot deliver on. And that's what the Labor Party does. It raises expectations and then it fails to deliver. And I can't help but think that when it comes to a very fast train, all they're doing in the dark days towards the election is raising expectations without any hope of actually ever delivering.
Steve, while Joe Hockey says Labor is raising expectations, they're expectations that have been raised under governments of both colours. Is this a project whose time has come?
Well, look, I mean, ultimately we see a $114 billion price tag. Lyndall, we see the government talking about this being off, completed by 2060 or something like that. I think most Australians collectively are yawning at this announcement. For all of the toing and froing about high-speed rail, and you'll get those who passionately believe this must happen and those who'll say it's just too expensive. The reality is that this is not going to be an issue that affects the outcome of the next election. The next election is going to be about the carbon tax, it's going to be about cost of living, and these big picture, talk fests that Anthony Albanese and the Prime Minister are pushing out there are nothing more than an attempt to distract from the fact that this is a government that is divided and dysfunctional and not governing Australia well.
Kelvin, why do you think no government has ever decided to give the go-ahead to high-speed rail?
Well, of course, it's a very costly arrangement, Lyndall, so you have to find the funding for it. But I'm intrigued by Steve's comments. A few weeks ago, the opposition was complaining that we have no vision. The truth is that we are looking ahead to Australia's future with the national broadband, with disability insurance, with increasing the superannuation guarantee, and this is part of the way in which we need to plan for this country's future.
Although Anthony Albanese was not today ready to sign up to say this is something that the government would do.
But we are doing the kind of work that needs to be done if such a project is to get off the ground and become a reality. The report we saw today contains a great deal more detail than we've seen previously, and I think the fact that it shows an inland route from Melbourne through to Sydney with stations at Shepparton, at Albury-Wodonga, at Wagga Wagga, at Canberra, I think that offers a much more realistic option than some of the ones that were being discussed 20 years ago. And I think the fact that we can see the potential for travel times between Canberra and Sydney of 64 minutes and an hour's travel time between Melbourne and Albury-Wodonga means that it is the kind of project which has the potential to be viable.
Steve, the train would actually go from where you are now in Brisbane to where Kelvin is now in Melbourne. Given that there is so many complaints about airport delays both in Brisbane and Sydney, do you think eventually the push will be there, the population will be there, the desire will be there for a government to actually greenlight this project?
Lyndall, frankly, whether there is or not, only time will tell. But I'll tell you this much. A project like this will never, ever, get off the ground for as long as the state of the nation's books are in the complete disarray they are under the Labor Party.
But we're talking, this project is
discussion,
talking
Lyndall,
about spending, Steve, over a very long period of time. It's not talking about spending the $100 billion at once.
No, but Lyndall, it doesn't matter, because the reality is this: unless the nation's books are in good financial state, unless the nation's finances are in a good state of repair, we simply cannot undertake the kind of endeavours. And you know, there's a delicious irony, frankly, about Kelvin saying, oh, we in the Labor Party, we're very focused on making sure we're nation building and long-term vision for Australia. You know what, Lyndall? This study isn't a consequence of the Labor initiative. This was part of the price that the Labor Party had to pay to get the Greens on side as part of the Labor-Greens coalition that's in government at the moment. I mean, that's why this study's on the table. It's got nothing at all to do with any great vision by the Labor Party. It's because the Greens Party made them do it. And the simple fact is, for as long as we are mired in debt and deficit for as far as the eye can see under this reckless spending Labor government, projects like this will only ever be one thing, and that is an apparition like an oasis in the desert a long way off in the future that will never be realised.
Kelvin, a final word on this. Will this project never be realised?
I believe that further on down the track that there is scope for this project to become a reality. It gives effect to a 2010 election promise, Steve, and we believe that this is the kind of thing which will be of value to Australians. I've travelled on high-speed rail in Europe, and I've done long-distance train travel in the United States, and I believe that there will be a demand for this kind of project, that there will be passenger support for it, and that it will enable us to go down the low-carbon, high-productivity road.
We might move on now. While the potential for job creation of a project like high-speed rail would be large, employment figures out today were a little on the disappointing side. While the big jump in employment in February was actually revised up a little bit, around half of that jump disappeared last month, with employment down 36,000. The Shadow Treasurer thinks there are signs of weakness in the economy.
So the numbers do bounce around, but unfortunately the trend is not going in favour of the Australian worker. If the participation rate had been higher, then the unemployment number, of course, would have been much higher. And this reflects what we've been hearing on the ground and in newspapers and in the media for the last few months. That is, there has been a drop in employment confidence in Australia. It's harder and not easier to employ Australians, and it's more costly than ever to employ more Australians.
Kelvin, the trend rate of unemployment was actually steady during the month, but it's not going down. Is the economy simply not strong enough to be at the level where it creates enough jobs to push unemployment down further?
Lyndall, Australia has pretty much the best economy in the world, with low inflation, low interest rates, AAA credit rating, low unemployment, low public sector debt. But it is correct that our future is not assured, and the things that we have been doing to set up Australia for jobs growth remain very important. I think it bears out the wisdom of the government's decision to rein in the temporary migrant worker program. It shows that we have some 670,000 Australians of all kinds of races, nationalities and the like. They are entitled to our first consideration. They are entitled to be given a go. And I think it also shows that it would be unwise for Australians to elect a government which has its heart set on austerity programs, sacking 20,000 public servants, cutting $500 million from the automotive support program, trying to do broadband on the cheap. We've seen austerity measures in Europe. They have led to higher unemployment, and if they are applied in Australia, they will lead to higher unemployment here.
But you say while Australia's economy looks strong, particularly when you compare it to Europe and the United States, yes, the rate of economic growth simply isn't enough at the moment, is it, to bring unemployment down? Well,
the rate of unemployment is that which has been anticipated and projected by Treasury in the budget figures and the like, but of course rising unemployment is not welcome. It's not welcome news, and therefore that's why we've put in place the plan for Australian jobs. That is why we are reining in the temporary migrant worker program. That is why we are looking at nation building exercises like the National Broadband Network, which will set up Australia well for the future.
Steve, is part of the problem where you are based, your electorate is based, and indeed where Kelvin is, the continuing strength of the high dollar, which is having an effect on manufacturing, having an effect on tourism, and that is not going away.
Lyndall, I think you're being a little too generous to the government. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact that only 1 month ago, Julia Gillard was out there from the hilltops saying, look at what a marvellous job the Labor Party's doing, look at all this creation, this job employment creation that we've going on about. The reality is this, Lyndall, we've just seen the unemployment rate tick up. We've seen it increase up to 5.6%. We saw effectively a loss of 30,000 jobs in the last month. And this is coming at a time when we have globally, and certainly in the United States, an economic recovery. Kelvin says the Australian economy is doing so well, we're going so strongly. Well, why is the unemployment rate going up?
Yet
the simple fact is Labor can't have its cake and eat it too. They want to claim the credit when it looks like the numbers are good, but they want to wash their hands of it and say, oh, it's got nothing to do with us when the numbers are bad. The reason these numbers are bad, Lyndall, and bear in mind they'd be even worse if the participation rate hadn't declined, the reason they're bad is because this government's policies are working against job creation. And that's the reason why we've seen the numbers go up.
Yet if you look at the last 2 months, the employment increase in February was actually revised up. There were 74,000 jobs created in February. Half of that disappeared, but isn't that a net gain over 2 months?
Lyndall, the unemployment rate has gone up. It's gone up to 5.6%. At the peak of the GFC, it was at 5.9%. So we're only 0.3% below the peak of unemployment reached during the height of the GFC. And bear in mind, in Australia, we've had sustained economic growth. Bear in mind now that the US recovery is well underway. Bear in mind in the Asia-Pacific region, we've got strong economic growth. I mean, you've really got to wonder whether the Labor Party would be able to organise a single person to get a job, frankly, because what we've seen is Wayne Swan went out there and said, in the next 12 months, we're going to create 500,000 jobs. And he stared down the barrel of the camera and said it with all sincerity. Well, you know what, Lyndall? They've created fewer than 200,000 jobs. The unemployment rate's gone up. And like Labor's promise to get the budget back into surplus, this is yet another broken promise that simply will not be matched. It's not a case of look at what Labor says. What matters is to look at what Labor does.
We might just end now looking forward to next week. Next Friday, the state and territory leaders will gather with the Commonwealth to look at the issue of education funding, what's being called the Gonski reforms. Kelvin, is there a chance that you will get the states on board with this?
Well, I hope so, Lyndall, because it's clear from the Gonski review that there needs to be very significant support for public education and education generally in this country to ensure that disadvantaged students and disadvantaged schools do not miss out. The Gonski report made it very clear that there are risks if we don't get a significant federal and state government support for education funding.
And Stephen, just very quickly, should states sign up to it?
Sure. Well, Queensland released a study today, Lyndall, that showed under Labor's plans there'd be over 100 state schools worse off and 100 schools in Queensland worse off. So, you know, I'm not surprised that they're standing up for them.
That's where we'll have to leave it. Thank you very much for your time today.